Hello, everybody, it's your boy Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, here today to mull over my favorite video game series of all time, Xenoblade Chronicles. In this series, I give my overall thoughts and first impressions about a game or particular series, and we just discuss it. And I thought with rebranding the First Impression series to Mulling Over, it'd be as good a time as any to talk about Xenoblade once again, because this is a series that is extremely important for the channel. I've covered this series extensively, and it's been one of those games and series that has just been there over the years for me. I make no secret about my love and admiration for this franchise. And I've gone over my thoughts and opinions about Xenoblade extensively on the channel, especially certain scenes and scenarios that are played out. I've theorycrafted where this series will go in the future as well. But let's just take a step back and ask ourselves, well, what makes Xenoblade so special? And I think that answer will genuinely be up to you. Because I think the thing that makes Xenoblade hit the most is where you were in your life and at what point in it and where were you when you played it for the first time. I played Xenoblade X way back when in the year 2015 or 2016, somewhere around there, before 2 even came out. Yeah, X was my first game. And I fell in love with the game and just exploring that world with the giant robots and all that, and just the art direction of the game captivated me so much, like few other games ever have managed to. Especially the Zone of Primordia, the first one. And the funny thing was, I didn't even realize that it was a Xenoblade game, because for years afterwards, I forgot the name of the game. So when I played Xenoblade 2, I thought that was my first Xenoblade game. And it wasn't until a few years later where I happened to find the disc or the box for my Xenoblade X copy, and I saw Xenoblade on the cover. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, let's connect the dots here. And it's so funny to me how that can happen, because I think it speaks to one of the strengths of the franchise, that each of these games is kind of its own separate entity. Yeah, there's an entire overarching narrative to it all, right? And we've talked about that extensively as well. But I think one of the true beautiful things about Xenoblade is how each of the games kind of feels like its own thing. Xenoblade 1, 2, X, and 3. And each of these entries has its own little feel and fan base to it. And I think it's one of the hallmarks of an amazing franchise, in my opinion. Or at least a franchise that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because Final Fantasy and Persona, 2 of my other favorite series, also do this as well. To where they have the DNA of the overarching series integrated and interwoven throughout the entire experience, right? And this is especially true with Xenoblade, with the giant vistas and the world that just sucks you in and refuses to let go. But each of the games feels entirely different to one another, sometimes in terms of scope, artistic direction, and atmosphere. And kind of going off of that, each of the games focuses on a different time period. Xenoblade 1 focuses on the future, Xenoblade 2 focuses on the past, and Xenoblade 3 focuses on, well, the present, with Mobius. And then Xenoblade X focuses on giant freaking robots, and it's awesome. And honestly, that's my favorite period of time. But chances are, you can grab 1,000 people, have them all play this franchise, and you'll get 1,000 different opinions about what they like or dislike about each of the games. For instance, my favorite Xenoblade game is Xenoblade 2. I love it so much that it's my second favorite game of all time, second only to Nier Automata. And I've played Xenoblade 2 probably 4 or 5 times in total. I love and adore that game so much. And despite its faults, which I think Xenoblade on the whole has a lot of faults, it's not a perfect franchise by any means, but it's one of those franchises where I feel that the strengths far outweigh the cons. And this is especially true for Xenoblade 2, which is probably the game that if you told me to write you a list of cons or critiques, my list of critiques for Xenoblade 2 would probably be longer than the other games. But despite all of that, what I cherish the most out of Xenoblade 2 overshadows all of that. And it's always been a thing with me where a game can have these big crippling flaws or these giant issues that may be impermissible for some, but for me, I'm able to hyper-focus in on the aspects that I do genuinely love. And for Xenoblade 2, that is the characterization, that is the actual world as well, the combat loop. You know, once you'll watch an Enel guide to learn how to play, because Lord help me if the tutorials suck in this game. The music is captivating as well, and the overall plot is one that resonated really strongly with me. And my second favorite Xenoblade game of all time is Xenoblade Chronicles X, and that is by no means a perfect game either. But again, it's one of those situations where the cons get outweighed by the positives for me. Like, the world of Mira just is so captivating and engrossing, and the artistic direction of it. Mechanically speaking, I think Xenoblade X is the most sound game in the franchise. And as much as I love Xenoblade 2 for its actual story and characterization, I love Xenoblade X for its world design and actual gameplay loop. But even then, you have things about the other games that I absolutely love and cherish in a kind of a unique way compared to the other games in the franchise. I think Xenoblade 1 has amazing individual zone visual design. Few things in any game ever are as beautiful in my opinion as the nighttime zones of Balak Mountain or Satol Marsh, day and night of Aether Sea. Pick a zone in the Mechonis, just these locations are so beautifully designed, and they show the real power of having a strong artistic direction where you don't need to rely on sheer graphical fidelity to make an immersive location. You need to have inspiration and just good art direction, and that can carry you a lot of the way. Just create a visual that's striking and memorable that fits in the actual context of the game. And that's one of the things I think Xenoblade 1 does so well, is having each of these locations kind of make sense for where they are on the respective body part of the Mechonis or the Bionis. And the whole idea of the Monado, yeah, it's said a whole lot of times in Xenoblade 1, but it's a really cool concept, right? A sword that lets you see to the future, and the whole game is this struggle about trying to change destiny and all that. Is it an original plot device? No, but it's a really good one in Xenoblade 1. And I think that's one of the things that's really important about storytelling that a lot of people kind of ignore or gloss over. It's a lot of the times I don't find originality to be the most important aspect of the story, or even one of the important ones at all. It's how it's properly utilized and integrated in the actual game and the story that matter far more. Hell, even on release, I talked about Xenoblade 3 essentially just being the Black Sabbath War Pig song just made into a game. And that's not a critique, it's a brilliant thing. And I think I've talked about this before, but only a couple of videos. One of the coolest aspects of Xenoblade in terms of the actual storytelling, in my opinion, is how it's able to have kind of these two themes going about it. One I call the human theme, and one I call the existential theme. For Xenoblade 1, you have this us versus them mentality and dialogue going out across the entire game, with the peoples of the Bionis and the Mechonis being in perpetual war with one another. You have this us versus them military critique inside Xenoblade 1 as the overall narrative structure, and even in terms of the world design. Like, it's the heart and soul of Xenoblade 1. And that would be the human theme for that game, but for the actual existential theme, it's all about changing the future and finding your own path into tomorrow, the one you want to tread, not the one that's treaded for you. Xenoblade 2 is all about, in terms of the human theme, learning to preserve what we already have. There isn't an Elysium at the end of some proverbial rainbow to take us and whisk us away. The Paradise or Elysium, that doesn't exist. In fact, the Elysium, the true Elysium, is the one that we forge with our own blood, sweat, and effort with one another to create a better world in the world we now live in. Because it's the world we got. And despite all the politics and the religion in Xenoblade 2, you all have to come together at the end of the day to work together to make a better world and move into tomorrow with it. That's the human theme for Xenoblade 2, in my opinion. And it's told beautifully well because of the actual world design and the story going on. And then you have this existential component to it all, with Jin and Malos and even Klaus, about letting go from the pains of the past and learning from them and not being tied down by them. Allowing yourself to be able to move into the future and not be beholden by the past anymore. Use it as a lesson, don't ever forget it, but don't let it tie you down or use it as an excuse to prevent you from going into tomorrow. Xenoblade 3 in a lot of ways is similar to that. You have the human theme about the machinations of war and people being used as nothing more than like pawns on a chessboard and being treated as nothing more than pieces of a game, as mere entertainment and the whims and fancies of the people in power. That's the human message of Xenoblade 3 in a lot of ways, and the existential one is similar to Xenoblade 2, but in terms of the present. Where Xenoblade 2 focused on the past, Xenoblade 3 focuses on the present. And despite what routine or happiness you have achieved in the present, don't let it tie you down and use it as an excuse to prevent you from going to the future. Do you see how each of these games can have their own kind of like themes and messaging? Be connected to one another in similar structures, but be unique in their own right. And what that does is make a franchise that feels connected, but allows each entry in that franchise to stand by itself, stand on its own 2 feet, and tell its own unique narrative, not beholden to the others. You can play Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 by itself and never touch the others, and have a full, enriching experience. You can play all of them and have an even fuller one, but the game gives you that flexibility to tackle it in whatever way you want to. Xenoblade X is a little bit of an outlier here because it's kind of a spin-off. And I've always argued that where Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 focus in on the narrative experience of the games, Xenoblade X focuses on the gameplay experience, and the world design, and exploration, and mechanical processes that go into being a video game. Is it perfect? No, none of these games are perfect. But no game is perfect, and I think the reason I love Xenoblade so much is, despite all the faults and critiques I can levy at it, and each of the entries on an individual level, I still love them so much. And I always find myself coming back to this franchise time and time again. And honestly, these stories are kind of ageless, and they're kind of the stories that I would argue that I can watch and play them as many times as I want and never get bored of them. Most of the time, I discover something new to appreciate about them with every new watch or every new playthrough. And that may not hold for everyone out there watching this video, or everyone out there that plays Xenoblade. Like I said, I think sometimes, or at least all the time mostly, the best stories and the best games, those best experiences, are the ones that hit you at the right time and place. And for me, Xenoblade X and Xenoblade 2 were those games that hit me at the right time and place. The story and message of Xenoblade 2 is a really powerful one in my opinion, and I've been an ardent defender of Xenoblade 2 for years. Even before I kind of got a bit of a renewed reputation after the release of Xenoblade 3. There was quite a bit of period of time there where Xenoblade 2 was a really polarizing experience. It was always the most selling, or most sold game of the franchise, and it still is. But I think where a lot of franchises and a lot of communities can get mixed up in terms of like, oh, my game is better than your game and whatnot, and an entire like internet discourse, you know? And yeah, it's fun to engage in that, right? I have a little bit of banter in regards to that every now and then, but I think at the end of the day, I always just take a step back and realize I'm glad that each of these games exist. Because kind of the whole point of this video, that each game has its own feel and fan base, and that's kind of the point. That each of these games can target someone slightly different, and someone can have the experience that I had with Xenoblade 2 for Xenoblade 1 or 3 or whatever. Same thing with my experience with X. I love X to death. And I think when we look to the future, which is the point of this entire franchise, yeah, there's been some missteps along the way, a bit of confusion here and there, but I do think the future is bright irregardless of the path that Xenoblade goes in the future. Whether they want to tell a follow-up to Xenoblade 3 or a completely new, unique narrative, or hell, if they want to go back to Xenoblade X and go back into that. I wouldn't mind that one, I'm just saying. I think one of the strengths of Xenoblade on the whole is its ability to tell a unique and individualized narrative, and not feel as if, oh, if you don't play the other Xenoblade games, you're not going to have a good time with this game. I just don't feel that's the case. Because when you go into each of these games, you're going to ask different questions, depending upon which game you have played elsewhere. And that's the beautiful thing. If you played Xenoblade 3, before you play Xenoblade 1 and 2, you're going to go into Xenoblade 1 and 2 and be like, okay, well, let's get some context for the world where Kevis and Agnes came from. Or if you played 1 and 2 going into 3, you'd be like, oh, wait, I know all these scattered references. Or if you haven't, you'll be like, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? Why is there a giant robot in the desert? Why are we going through this giant whale guy who's become a mountain range? What's going on here? And you ask these questions that's unique to your own experience with Xenoblade up to that point. It never feels like a detriment to play the games in any way you want. It gives you a fresh and new perspective that's individualized to you, and it can be really hard to pull that off and to pull it off well. But I think Xenoblade on the whole is able to achieve that because these games are interconnected in one way or the other. But it's not like, oh, my first Marvel movie was Endgame. Yeah, it's not that level. And what that allows it to do is be unique and individualized to each player that comes into it, and be really accessible in my opinion. You kind of get your own individualized little unique narrative depending upon which game you start in, and how you progress through the franchise. And I don't think that should be knocked or ignored. It's something that's truly special about Xenoblade in my opinion. So yeah, I think we've mulled over Xenoblade Chronicles enough for one day. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great day. Go play some video games if you can, and leave a comment down below with your favorite Xenoblade game of all time. And what order did you play the Xenoblade franchise in? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and hear your opinions, and to hear your perspectives, and to hear your stories. So mull over the franchise in the comments down below, yeah? Yeah? Brought it back together there with the name of the series. Beautiful. Love to see it. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.